Football Manager is coming off of maybe the biggest week in its history with the inaugural Football Manager World Cup going wonderfully, and then a new development update dropped from Miles Jacobson, the head of SI and the development of Football Manager, the second development update, and it contained literally no, I would say positive news. I think there's one positive thing that can be taken from this, but it was definitely, it's continued this trend of announcing things that are kind of being removed from the game, but you can be a judge for yourself here. The one major takeaway, obviously, right off the top, is that they have decided to announce that the actual release date of the game is going to be delayed. And essentially, they had to remove extra stuff in order to prevent the release date being delayed even more. What am I talking about? Well, here's the development update from Miles Jacobson it actually dropped on September 4th. If you want to hear me talk about this stuff the day it comes out, by the way, I stream on Twitch, and we were talking about it on Twitch that day. You can check out the link to that in the description, obviously. But to kick this thing off, though, this entire first paragraph, I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with Football Manager 25 necessarily. This is just waxing poetic about the Football Manager World Cup, which of course I've done plenty of that as well. It was kind of overwhelmingly awesome, congratulating the winners and everything. But they said that there would be more updates kind of in September, and they acknowledged that here. Our last development update gave you a picture of our world in June, and since then we've had to review some of the things previously mentioned. I want to take this opportunity as well to update you on some further FM25 decisions we've made, as well as some alterations to our calendar. I'm not gonna lie, brother, that's a scary sentence, especially considering the fact that when I'd read that, all I'm thinking about is the fact that we haven't seen the match engine yet, right? And so clearly there are at least certain things that are under development, or they're planning a particularly large, enthusiastic reveal for all of that sort of stuff. But the first section is revising our timelines. We previously stated that we would be confirming FN25's release date at the beginning of September. This led to a lot of people thinking that they were going to use, me included, that they were going to use the Football Manager World Cup as an opportunity to announce, either show a gameplay trailer or announce the release date or something. They didn't do any of that, which, I mean, fair, I guess that's just not something that they were planning on, and obviously SI, the company that makes Football Manager, wasn't in charge of the World Cup. That was FIFA E, the esports branch of FIFA itself that was actually running the tournament, so maybe they weren't able to do that. All those things were swirling around in my head at the time. But they don't beat around the bush here. Firstly, we've had to shift the official announcement of FM25 to the end of September. So basically, instead of announcing the game at the beginning of September, they're dropping a development update at the beginning of September and saying that the official game announcement is going to be at the end of September, right? Where they start to roll out, a bunch of features that you can expect to be in the game and all of that fun stuff. They call that the gameplay focus period, which is going to be soon after. So that's when they're going to shine a light on all the new parts of the game. And again, FM25 is going to be a huge change from previous Football Managers, right? It is essentially a Football Manager 2, as it were. It's shifting into an entirely new engine. They're overhauling every single aspect of the game, but they've also been working on this game for a long time. Remember Work the Space, I remember texted me a picture 4 or 5 years ago of an ad that SI had put up looking for people that knew how to work in the Unity engine. So this is definitely something they've been developing pieces and parts of this game for 4 or 5 years, literally going into pre-pandemic, from when those kind of job posts started to surface. So this is one of those games that has been developed, even though it's a yearly sports game. This is a particularly gargantuan leap that is occurring, which means, of course, I'm particularly excited for the gameplay focus period, but the gameplay focus period is not happening yet. But basically, they said the target launch date is moved accordingly, and an emphasis on target launch date, right? We still don't have a hard launch date for the game. Just the general assumptions, the game's always going to come out in early November. They're now basically saying that it is scheduled for late November. They have moved it from the beginning of the month to the end of the month. The same with the announcement and the actual release of the game, at least the way they're planning it out right now. But I don't imagine it's going to jump any earlier. The only way it would shift is further backward. Obviously, I'm hoping that doesn't happen, because that means that something is continuing to kind of go wrong behind the scenes. They also say something that the FM25 development cycle has been challenging for the whole team. I mean, this, them moving the development date, which is not something, or the release date, that's not something that they do a lot, certainly not to the end of November. It sounds like this is going to be the latest released Football Manager since I started making videos about Football Manager. That would indicate that this has been, even though they've spent years working on it, particularly challenging. We knew moving the entire game to the Unity engine was going to be a complex endeavor, and as we've gotten deeper into the process and gained learnings, it's fair to say it's been trickier than we originally anticipated. There's two parts to this, because one, obviously, I appreciate the transparency that is going on here. This is not something that SI or Football Manager used to do a lot of as somebody that has kind of tracked this for a long time. But on the flip side, it is also concerning to hear about, right? The fact that they've been working on this obviously for a long time, and yet seemingly over like the last couple of months, they've uncovered some things that were trickier than they anticipated and that are complicating what they're trying to do. They restate their thesis from June in overhauling the entire game. Will we do it in the same way if we had time again? Will we have done this at all? Do we have the time required to do this to the highest possible standard in our first cycle of the new era? And it's that third one. It's that third one that has caused me the most amount of pain, because it's the next paragraph where my heart broke a little bit, but there's a chance that it could end up being a good thing in the end. But they're basically what SI and Football Manager are doing here is they are writing a check, and we are going to see next year if they are able to cash that check. Right? That's what's happening. I said the challenges we've encountered in the development process over the last couple of months have led us to make another difficult decision around game content. International management will not be a playable mode in FM25, FM25 console, or FM25 like touch. This is really sad to me. I love international management, the ability to simulate international tournaments. On my Twitch stream, we will literally just watch international tournaments, and in order to do that, you have to create managers. Like I don't know if we're going to be able to do that anymore. In every journeyman I've ever played, I've become the national team coach of somebody. England, Brazil, Ghana, the United States. I've done it. Right, even though international management has been broken for a long time, which is where I'm also coming at it from that angle, where I'm like, international management has sucked for a long time. It has sucked. Right, like the fatigue has been off. You can't manage the morale. You can't manage the training. It's like you just pick the players and then inshallah, right? Like, and you just, we'll see what happens, right? Because everybody's going to get exhausted. And you watch Africa Cup of Nations, and Mo Salah gets so tired he has to sub out after 50 minutes in the final, right? Because he's been playing every match. It's not been up to the standard, but still, having international management be removed from the game entirely, it does just feel like a natural step backwards. Like, it feels like a painful step backwards, in particular because the women's game is being added this year. And I'm going to be perfectly honest. I'm somebody that, I'm from the United States. The women's national team in the United States obviously draws more viewers than the men's national team a lot of times, and like wins World Cups and Olympic gold medals, which are both in equal measure huge deals in the women's side of the game. But when they announced that women's football was going to be in Football Manager, the first thing I wanted to do was manage the U.S. women's national team, right? Like, I'm learning, I'm getting better, I'm getting more familiar with like the best women's players around the world and the best women's clubs. And in Europe, they're kind of all the same clubs, but in the United States, the NWSL, right, where you have this kind of different league structure, right, that aren't the same clubs as on the men's side, and kind of learning that too. I still have a long way to go though. Right, if I fire up a save in the NWSL in Football Manager, I'm gonna have no idea what the hell's going on, at least for a couple of seasons, until I can kind of figure out all the teams and like who the good players are that are still in the league and whatever. So if I was gonna play the women's game, it was gonna be in the international side, because the international side in the women's game is what draws the most eyeballs by a lot, right? And so removing international management when women are added to the game sucks in particular. But now to the whole cashing the check thing that I was talking about earlier. This is the paragraph right here. Rather than delay FM25 even further, we paused work on that area of the game and allocated those resources to other key areas. It will continue to exist in the game as a part of the wider simulation of football. So like, it's gonna still be there, it just won't be playable. However, international management will remain playable in FM25 mobile, which, again, congratulations to those people. For all other versions, international management will return in a much more feature-rich way in FM26, in what will be an exciting year for international football, with the World Cup expanding to 48 teams. To be clear, this will return as part of the base game and not as any form of additional downloadable content. Which, appreciate them making that last part clear. And I appreciate them saying that they're going to bring it back in a more feature-rich way. Now, obviously, you guys know my hatred of yearly sports games, because that's what makes this sort of thing happen all of the time. Where, like, it might take them an extra month or two to flesh out international management, but then we're going to have to wait another 11 or 10 months in order to be able to play the international management that they've fleshed out, because it's going to be released, in FM26. I can track the logic here. Like, I understand what's happening, and I understand why they've decided to do it now. They actually talk about it. We've considered the available game data. Only 5.6% of all FM 24 PC saves have used the mode, which we feel validates our view that we need to do much, much better with the experience. I love that also because I feel like in the past, a lot of games do this, but Football Manager's definitely done this where they'll point out something like only 5.6% and they'll say, well, there's just not a lot of interest in that mode. And instead of doing that, they realize that there is a lot of interest in international management, but the fact that so few people actually play it is a great indicator that it's just busted as hell and that they need to do a better job with it. So I like a couple of the logical threads that they're following here. Like, it makes sense that, you're going to pause the development on international management so you can get the game out in a respectable amount of time. Like, I understand all of that. I just feel like it sucks anyways, right? Like, is even though international management was bad, not being able to do it at all is obviously worse. And this is not a development update where they're giving us any nuggets of good information. It's really just that. But that and the release date kind of moving back are the two main things. That being said, there's something else in here that set a good number of people off, and it set the exact people off that you would expect it to set off. Basically, some people just really want to be mad at stuff. I'm sad. I don't know if I'm mad about this. I'm just sad that international management's not going to be in the game for the year, that they can't fit it in this development cycle. I'll get more to my thoughts on that at the end, but I got to talk about this funny thing first. I will say I think it's funny though. Miles does have this paragraph talking about the personal sacrifices he's making to try and get the game finished in time. Like, I was supposed to speak at a conference. I was supposed to go to Tokyo's game show. I'm not doing either of those things. I was just like, all right. No, sorry. This is the one that I was just like, all right. He's like, I've canceled a trip to America, which I was really looking forward to. But the game is you, the player, as the players of our game, the bigger picture. I butchered that sentence, but you get the idea. I mean, Miles obviously, and this is the pod calling the kettle black here. Miles loves to talk, obviously, and he is making it very clear, or trying to make it very clear, that he is canceling all of this stuff so he can get the game finished on time. But honestly, if you read between the lines on all of this sort of stuff, that also means I don't think the development of the game is going nearly as smoothly as they would want it to. Obviously, they've already had to move the release date back. We have had no images or anything of the match engine. Well, apparently, we're going to get that at the end of September. But like the development of the game is clearly kicking SI's ass a little bit right now, and it's all hands on deck, and they figured out the most convenient thing that they'd be able to cut from this year's game in order to try and make that deadline on time. But then there's the section and update the player profiles. This section is just kind of wild. As you know, it's been a long-term project for us to move to Unity. Throughout the process, we've been laser-focused on introducing women's football to FM in the most authentic way. We've applied that thinking to everything we've done, as we generally do with all areas of design and development. From a gameplay perspective, being able to move seamlessly between managing men's and women's clubs and vice versa in one ecosystem was the number one priority, but that forced us to consider how various game aspects are currently portrayed. We now share a change we've made. Through the creation of Women's Football Database, we discovered that while the weight of male athletes can change a bit month to month, women's body types are very different from men's, and their weight fluctuates a lot more, often weekly. This perspective encouraged us to review the wider game, and we've ultimately decided to no longer show weight for any players in FM25. A very basic measurement. We will still be included under the hood, but it won't be visible on the front end anymore. But basically what they're saying there is under the hood of the game, there will be a rough estimate of the weight of the player just for the actual, avatar of the player in the game, but you're not going to be able to see player weights anymore. When I saw this, I was like, oh, duh, because I used to work in sports broadcasting. I was a play-by-play broadcaster, and I've called a lot of men's and a lot of women's sports. I had women's soccer, women's lacrosse, women's field hockey, volleyball, softball, like all of them. No women's roster has ever listed weight. I don't know when that started. I'm assuming it had to do with maybe kind of what they're talking about, maybe body image. I don't know, right? But men's rosters in most sports list weight. Women's rosters, they list height. They just don't really list weight. At least the rosters that I would always get, the game study I would always get, you just wouldn't mention the weight because it was never listed, which means if you're Football Manager and you're putting this together, you don't know the weight of the players, right? I mean, you can eyeball it, right? Is she absolutely shredded or is she super skinny, right? But you can't, and that's what they're talking about is going to be under the hood, right? For the avatar section, right? But you can't find the weights of these players. So the logistical challenge alone for Football Manager to try and figure out the weights of all of these players just doesn't make any sense. What's interesting is that they've decided to remove the weight from the men's side as well. My guess is this is because the men's and women's players are going to show up in the same place at various points in the game. And there was just something annoying with the coding of trying to have all the men's players have their weights in there and have all the women's players not have all their weights in there. So they've just decided to remove all of them. That, or Football Manager does always try to be very progressive with this sort of stuff. And they just decided that if the women's players weren't going to have weights, the men's players weren't going to have weights either. But, and this is crucially important, this does not matter at all. It just doesn't, right? Like, the weight has no effect on the performance of the player in the game. It just has an effect on how they look in the game. You barely ever look at weight while you're playing the game. You look at it once, maybe when you're signing a guy and you're like, oh, there's a big beefy forward, you know, but you can see that from the strength, right, of the player in the first place, typically. And so other than the fact that this is, you know, the Akinfenwa rule is basically being removed here, this doesn't matter at all. But obviously, this change, and especially the fact that they really associated this change with women being added to the game, definitely just like set a few people off. But there's like, this is an incredibly small visual change. I feel like it's the sort of thing they could have not even announced, and most people wouldn't have noticed and never would have cared. So there's really no reason, like, at least in my opinion, to get very bent out of shape about this. I am fascinated in the like, obviously I just talked about it, the different kind of logical reasons to make those changes. Was it code, or was it just super annoying? I would imagine. Now, here's your third option. It was super annoying to have to update the weights of all of the players every year for basically no return, and adding women to the game just provided a convenient excuse for SI to finally have to stop updating the weights of players every year. Because you just imagine the amount of data input it required to get the weight of every player in the database. Now they just don't have to do that anymore. You get like the rough estimate, which doesn't have to change really over a player's career, and then you're good. You're fine. And their AI, they're like, their avatar is just gonna look okay. Yeah, but it's wild that they included a full section for this, but they didn't include a full section for the kind of international management being removed. And I think also making it a full section definitely fired more people up. There's also an update to the testing. Basically, if you submitted to be one of the UI UX testers for FM25, the acceptance date to that has also been moved back to match the rest of the timeline. But that was it. The release date's been moved back. I'm getting a little more nervous about this game. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. I'm getting a little more nervous about this game. The way they're making it sound, it is a bucking bronco that they are trying to manage into the end of November. And it is fighting back, right? It is not going exactly according to plan, and it is never great to hear from a game company, obviously, that it is not going great according to plan. Now, don't get me wrong. I am tremendously excited for the shift to Unity, right? We've talked about that on stream. I've talked about that in previous videos. And I think eventually on Unity, Football Manager will be better off for being on Unity. I mean, the UI options are better, right? The visual graphics engine is so much better, and it's just so much easier for SI and Football Manager to not have to build their own kind of graphics engine. They can, you know, rely on the Unity graphics engine and focus more on gameplay, and that's great, and the graphics will be better and freaking awesome. But the more this kind of drags on, it does seem like maybe Football Manager should have waited one more year to move to Unity. If you are stepping into a new era, you definitely love to step into that new era while sticking the landing and being like, yes, we have got all the things in the game that we want looking the way that we want them to look. Right now, it feels like even though it's been years in development, they are kind of scrambling to the finish line. That doesn't mean the game can't be good, right? Like, I'm not somebody that's going to pass judgment on a game that I haven't seen, that I haven't played, right? But based off of the information we know, there are going to be pieces missing from the game that they would have preferred to have in the game if they'd had a little more time to work on it. So I think, and maybe hindsight being 2020 here, they've obviously already committed moving to Unity this year. Hindsight being 2020, they maybe would have taken one more year to kind of move it over to Unity. But obviously, I'm going to play the game regardless, so if you want to wait and see what you think of the game before it actually comes out, this moment I get my hands on it, obviously it sounds like in November now, you know, for the beta, if they're still doing that sort of thing. I don't know. It seems like it's a bit of a weird situation right now. I will definitely be playing it here and showing it off to you and talking about it, and you'll be able to form your own opinions and decide whether you want to get the game or not. Yes, but the nerves and the anxiety level around Football Manager 25, they're rising a little bit, and no international management. So sad times for the U.S. women's national team, because I will not be leading them this year. Hopefully next year. Well, I guess like 2026 is 2 years from now, but oh God, it's so far away.